I also work with Dan Clark, who's the director. He's been there for years. And we do trainings like this all over the state. This is one that the county and the city have been gracious enough to keep in their rotation twice a year. So we get to come see you guys quite a bit, which is awesome. And so I'll give you a little bit more information about the center and about what we do. But before I do that, I just want to know who's in the room. So if you could give me your name and the board that you serve on, and maybe how long you've been on that board or boards, that would be awesome. We'll start in the room and then we'll jump to the online folks.
I'm Brandon Wasser. I'm on the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee, and I've been on there for like 2 months now.
Okay, cool. Great.
Kelly Sager. I'm on the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Board. I've been on for 6 months.
How many people are on the Bike and Pedestrian Board? Good. You guys are representing for the whole. Maybe. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Erin Castellanos. I serve on the Parks and Rec board, in addition to some special advisory committees, but there's a number of those.
Great. And how long have you been on that?
For a year.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Patty Carroll. I'm on the board of Partnership Health Care.
Okay.
And I've been there less than a year.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Larry Anderson. I serve on the airport board, and I think I'm starting my 14th year there in various capacities.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Deb Poteet. I'm on the airport board also. I've been there for 4 years.
I'm Brady Potts, and I'm newly appointed to the planning board.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Elderkin. I've been serving on the food policy board for about 4 months.
Okay, great.
I'm Danette. I'm not on the board, but my boss told me I needed to come to this meeting. So, I'm with the Missoula Parking Commission.
Okay, great.
I'm Christine Liddig. I serve on the Affordable Housing Resident Oversight Committee for the city for the last year.
Ezra Williams and Historic Preservation, and tonight's the first meeting.
So you are just in with it.
Hi, Marilyn Ryan. I'm on the Election Advisory Committee. I'm an alternate. I've been on for about a year as an alternate.
I'm Jean Belancini. I serve on the mosquito board at Lolo for 22 years. Anybody who wants to join can have my place. And I'm also a trustee with the Historic Museum at Fort Missoula, and I've been there for 4 years.
I'm John Haber. I'm on the Board of Adjustment as of the beginning of this year. I'm looking forward to my first actual meeting this month, I think.
Nice. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you for that. And those of you online, would you be willing to share? If you can unmute and you have audio, that's great. If not, you can throw it in the chat. We can check that too. Everybody jump at once.
Is anyone able to unmute themselves and introduce online?
Can't unmute, Matt says. Matt, which board are you with? We have mics disabled. Oh.
Here we go. Now it seems like it's working. Matt Tomey, I'm with the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Board. I think it's been 5 months.
5 months? Okay, great.
Cameo Flood with the Election Advisory Committee. I just got on the board.
Great, thank you.
Elizabeth Johnson. I'm the staff liaison to the Historic Preservation Commission, and I've been in my position for a little over a year now.
Awesome. Okay.
Annie Green. I am on the board of Partnership Health Center, and I have been there coming up on 2 years.
2 years, okay.
Mike Day. I serve on the AIS board for the county past 1.5 years.
1.5 years, you said. Okay. Okay, great.
I think I just got unmuted. Ooh. This is Joanne Wallenburn, and I'm on my 5th year with the Weed Board and my 2nd year with Mike on the AIS District Board.
Okay. Okay, cool. And Dave, I see you got your hand up. Can you unmute for us?
Yeah, Dave Loomis here, over 2 years on the planning board.
Planning board. Okay, great.
My name is Melissa Heidel, and I was just appointed to the Missoula Aging Services Board.
This is Katie Gonzalez. I did get myself unmuted. I'm on the Big Sky Horse Park board and just 1 month in.
Elizabeth Olison, Tom Green Park Advisory Board, just recently appointed.
Great. Okay. Is there anybody that we missed? Also, would it be helpful for those of you online if we turn the lights on? It looks like it might be kind of dark.
My coloring's fine.
Was that I can see? Okay. Well, if you need it, let us know. We'll have the chat going so we'll be able to see what you guys have to say. Okay. Who did I miss in the room? Where are you guys from? Which board are you serving with and how long have you been? So which board are you with? What's your name and how long have you been there?
Oh. I'm Paige Studnick. I'm on the Parks and Trail Advisory Board, and I just joined, so.
I'm with the Affordable Oversight Housing Committee, and Lana.
How long have you been with me?
Very brand spanking.
Brand new. Awesome.
Yes.
Okay. That's what we like. Okay, so we have everything from first meeting tonight to 14, 22 years. So we have all kinds of range in the room, which is awesome. I like working with groups like this because there's a large diversity of groups represented. In some of the places that we work with, the same people serve on all of the boards, and they have like maybe a third of the boards that you guys do, right? So it's just everybody's doing all of the things in town just because they don't have enough people. So it's great to see this kind of a turnout and this kind of diversity represented. So like I said, my name is Ashley. I am from the Local Government Center. We do trainings like this all over the state. We focus on governance. So anything to do with the process of local government is kind of what we focus on. And we do things that are under state level. So city, county, special district, advisory, board, all of that falls under our purview. You get to state level, we kind of step back from that because it's not part of our mission. We're really here for the local government. Okay. So we're going to spend the next couple hours or so talking about boards, board governance, board management, all of that kind of stuff. But I want to know, is there anything that keeps you up at night with your board service? Any questions that you have or topics you want to make sure that we cover today? And online, I'm looking at you too. Thoughts or ideas? I don't know. Just totally need to show up, right?
Communication limitations.
Okay.
Or
Tell me more. What is that?
guidelines, just what you can discuss. Communication guidelines, just what you can discuss and what you can't discuss, and what the best way to, move through this process in a public setting versus private.
Yeah. Okay. Yep, I like that. Okay. What else? Yeah.
Some of the major differences between like nonprofit board governance versus government.
Okay. Okay. Nonprofit versus public. What else? That's it? We touch on those two and then we leave? I mean, we can. Okay, we'll come up with more. Anybody online, if you have anything you want to make sure that we touch on, please let me know and I'll put it up there. And we can add to the list as we go. Did everybody get, either that's in the room, get a packet? Or, I thought we had some jamming music going on. Yeah. If you didn't get a packet, let me know. Also, if you're online, you should have links. There should be 2. We are super creative at the center, and we name our packet links left side and right side. So they should be pretty self-explanatory. We all got that? All right. Let's just do a quick, I'm gonna lose all of my markers. That's gonna happen. Do a quick thought exercise before before we jump into the content. Tell me, why do we have local government? Why does it exist? Safety, okay. Public safety. What else?
Representation
Representation of who?
of the public.
Okay, so public representation. What else?
Checks and balances.
Ooh, okay, so checks and balances, authorities, roles, responsibilities. Yeah.
Relevant expertise.
Yes. Ooh. Tell me more. What do you mean by that?
So there's a plethora of committees in here, and I'm assuming everybody serves on those committees because they have an interest in that subject, and also specific to this jurisdiction, whether it's city or county.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you're talking about the planning board, you have some knowledge of the real estate process specific to this area.
Right. Okay. Yep. So for those of you online, he's saying expertise and relevant knowledge, right? So if you think about the commission, whether it's city or county, finding a single person that can represent the expertise that's necessary for all that the county is responsible for is basically impossible, right? Think about the breadth of issues that they deal with, everything from child immunization records to food safety, cemetery plots to roads, all of these things, right? That's a huge array of things that the county or the city is responsible for. And you ask 1, 2, 3 people at the county level to oversee all of that. There's not enough time in the day to start with. And there's no way that you can be an expert in all of those things, which is why we set up this structure where we can appoint or elect people who have some kind of expertise or interest or voice in a certain area to communicate with the public, really dig into issues at a deeper level, and then be able to channel that up to those people that we've elected to govern, in this case, the county commission, right? So there's all kinds of services that come from that. Can you imagine if each of us were responsible for paving the streets in front of our property that we own, just what you own, not if you rent. You're responsible for paving the street in front of your property 50 feet on either side. Figure out how to get the equipment, the materials, the expertise, the labor, whatever. You figure it out, it's up to you. Can you imagine driving from here to Sealy? Be a hot mess, right? So one of the major components of local government, the reason that it exists, is to create and provide services that we can't do on our own, but we can do collectively. Things like public safety, roads, bridges, waste, all of these things that we need to function. And a lot of times we don't even recognize that the infrastructure is there, especially when it works well, right? But we can't do it unless we pool our resources. So how do we pool our resources? How do we fund all of that? Taxes, right? So we, quote unquote, voluntarily assess ourselves, right? For all of these different services. And that money comes from local people who will use those local services. And then who oversees the administration of those services and that budget? Somebody elected or appointed locally, right? And at some point, it's a direct election accountable back to the people. That's completely different than, say, if we think about back in the day, expansionist England. When the UK would conquer a new territory, they would send a governor from England to that territory to govern on behalf of the crown, instead of electing somebody locally, because we know better than you do. So let us just send somebody to help you out with this. How well would that work in Missoula County? Probably not, which is great. That's why we have the system we do. It's a representative form of government where the voice of the public can be heard, right? So that's why we have local government. It's a little bit different than the state and federal level because it's so much more accessible. And the things that most impact your daily life happen at the local level. So this is the nerdy LGC preach that we got going on, but this is why we do what we do, right? Because it's such a big deal in our daily lives. Okay. Anybody know what happened in Montana in 1972? Constitutional Convention, okay? Was that our first constitution that Montana ever had? No. When did the first one come about?
Survey 1889.
We're about to have a history lesson. So the first one actually happened, the first draft happened in the late 1870s. We wanted to be part of the Cool Kids Club that was the union, right? Said, hey, we want to be a state too. This is kind of working out well. So we sent in a draft constitution, said, hey, can we be part of the club? And they said, no, your constitution's not strong enough. It doesn't really make sense. It doesn't fit with what we're looking for. Not going to happen. So our first constitution draft got rejected. And then in the 1880s, they tried again. And with that one, we borrowed heavily from Pennsylvania and Iowa, who had just been admitted right before us. The problem was they were heavy railroad states. So our constitution looked like a railroad state constitution. Okay, but they said, we know it works. So they submitted that draft, and that one got accepted, and that's when we got our statehood as the state of Montana. Who do you think the 1889 Constitution favored? The Copperheads, right? So everybody knew that all of the decisions that were really very important in the state happened in the back rooms, in the bars in Butte, and then they'd send people to Helena and say, this is how you're going to vote. Okay. How did the other 99% of the state feel about that? Not super warm and fuzzy. So that, amongst many other things, is what precipitated the Constitutional Convention that took place in 1971 in Helena. We sent 100 delegates from across the state that didn't have any special training or qualifications. One of the few requirements was that if they served as a constitutional delegate, they could never serve an elected office in the state. So you can't have any incentive to write this constitution to fit you. Okay. So it was an incredible act, and the document that we got out of it has withstood the test of time. We have the option to open it up and redo it every 20 years. So far, that hasn't been taken up, but we'll see if that changes. But the Constitution of the state of Montana is this little booklet. Little guy. This is the state constitution and the federal constitution and a whole bunch of amendments, all in that little bitty pamphlet. This is our governing document, the vision for who we want to be as a state. So does this tell us what we need to know? Not so much. It tells us what our rights are, right? It tells us what the vision is. So you have a federal Bill of Rights, right? You also have a state Bill of Rights. And we can talk about what those are if you're interested, but there's 3 that we're going to focus on today. Numbers 8, 9, and 10. The right to know, the right to participate, and the right to privacy. And if you look at the left side packet, page L1 at the top, you'll see the 3 of those highlighted at the top of that page. The right to participation, the right to know, and the right to privacy. Those are the 3 state constitutional rights that govern everything that you do as a board member, committee member, any kind of local government representative. So we have the Constitution. We know that this is not enough to give us guidance on what we need to do. So what comes next? How do you get from Constitution to action? Who translates the Constitution and how? The courts will rule on the translation. The legislature, okay? So every other year for 90 days, we have the legislature convene. And, well, hold on. Convene in Helena, and they create state law. State law has to be consistent with the spirit of the Constitution. But what it does is it says, here's our big picture vision, and here's how we actionize it. Okay? Here's what the law is actually going to say. MCA, the Montana Code Annotated, that's our state law book. That starts to get a little bit more prescriptive. Is it super clear all the time? All the laws? Nope. And we kind of like it that way. Because the more vague the law is, we being the Senate, the more vague the law is, the more flexibility you have to create your own local rules that fit what you need. Because there's a good chance that what the city or the county of Missoula's citizens need is not the same as what Sidney, Montana needs, or Dillon, Montana, right? They're different So the ambiguity, the vagueness in the code gives you the flexibility to meet those needs locally. Make sense? Okay. So we have Constitution, we have the MCA, and then those local rules, what are they? Who makes the local rules? The local government of some degree, right? So the county, the city, there may be some measures that the citizens need to vote on, but it's a local measure, right? It's bound by the geographic boundaries of the city or the county or whatever it is. Okay. So that would be ordinances or resolutions. So you have county ordinances. Is anybody here from the city? We have one. Okay. Two. Woohoo. Way to represent. And kind of. Okay. Oh, that's true. That's fair. Okay. So I'm going to reference county, mostly because I'm lazy, but it can be both. Okay. So the county has ordinances and resolutions that it works from. Does that define everything that you do as a board? No. What else could define what you do? Bylaws. Okay. So you could have something like bylaws or rules of procedure or a charter, an establishing resolution. All of those things would fall under policy. And it will define what you do if it's not already defined at the state or local level. So that's how we get from Constitution, that little book, to action. How do we do what we do every day? Okay. Now, we do know that third branch of government that's sitting out there. Actually, let's do this. Nobody's help, I'm not supposed to do this. We're not recording, right? You can't have video evidence. What are the three branches of the government? Heard the murmurings. Legislative and executive. So if we start at the federal level, who's this? President. Congress. And the Supreme Court. Well, it's very similar at the state level, right? This is governor, legislature, and the Montana Supreme Court. Okay. What about at the county level? Do we have a county judicial? General. Yep. Okay. What about the legislative branch? Who's that? Council or county. The commission. Okay. What about the executive branch? So at the city level, it's the mayor in Missoula. In cities that have adopted a city manager form of government, it would be the manager, right? And at the county level, the commission. Okay, and this gets really tricky because with these two circles completely overlapping, it's tough for the commissioners to define when are they in legislative role and when are they in executive role. And it matters a lot because when they're in an executive role, they don't necessarily have to adhere to open meeting laws. But when they're in a legislative role, they do. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Okay, so we know this is all happening for the most part at the legislative circle. But then every once in a while, we need to have the judicial branch come in and do a little bit of interpreting for us. That can happen at any level, at any of this level, policy level. Which judicial body does that for the state? Both. Okay, so you have either the Attorney General and or the Montana Supreme Court. They can make rulings pretty much anywhere along the way. Let's take a look at that L1 page that we talked about earlier. So under the right, let's do the right to participation, section 8 of our state constitution. Public has the right to expect governmental agencies to afford such reasonable opportunity for citizen participation in the operation of the agencies prior to final decision as may be provided by law. So they specifically said, we know that this is super vague, so we're going to leave it open to as be provided by law, so we can clarify what that means. Then you jump down into Title II, Chapter 3, Government Structure and Administration, and it's specifically about public participation in government operations. 23103 at the bottom of this page is that big highlighted section. This, to me, is one of the most important clauses or most important statutes in local government. If you follow the spirit and intention of this statute, everything else is just how you do it. Okay? So each agency shall develop procedures for permitting and encouraging the public to participate in agency decisions that are of significant interest to the public. Shall develop procedures for permitting and encouraging. So just saying, hey, we're having a meeting tomorrow night at 6. That's not adequate, right? You're not encouraging them to be there, to have their voice heard. And significant interest to the public. When we talk about the vagueness of the code, what is significant interest? It can be almost anything. Basically, what the Attorney General has said is it's anything beyond a ministerial act, which means anything beyond coordination, kind of administrative decisions, anything above that level can be considered significant interest to the public. And it's not the body that gets to decide that, it's the public. Okay. Procedures must ensure adequate notice and assist public participation before a final agency action is taken that is of significant interest to the public. What is adequate notice? This is what they gave us to go on. That's what the state statute says. So how do we define what that means? This is one of those things that comes back, and at some point somebody says, all right, we need somebody to clarify what is adequate notice. Because some groups say it's 12 hours, some groups say it's 2 weeks.
Well, one of the things is some people put it online, and some people don't have computers with access, or they bury it with the agency online so you can't find it. So unless the public makes an issue of it, it stays online. And in others, it may range from a week to 2 or 3 days. It just depends on the organization and what they decide.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, and you forgot advisory councils and neighborhood work in advisory capacity to the county commissioners and the city council.
Yes, remind me, we can talk about, does everybody know, are you advisory or administrative on your board? Advisory. Okay. So you're gonna act a lot like the advisory council, but in a different capacity. Meaning, the only action that you can take as an advisory board is to advise the governing body that has created you, right? So if you were to put out, like I talked to another city here a couple months ago. I had one of the boards call me and they were all kind of frustrated. And they said, we just kind of got our hands slapped because we were trying to support the city commission on this initiative that they're doing. Great thing. We agree with them. So we put out a letter of support and we just got reprimanded. Why? They did. This happened at a meeting. So they had public comment. They knew it was going to happen. They signed the document at the public meeting. The problem is they're an advisory board. By putting out that statement of support, they took an action that they don't have the authority to take. All they can do is advise. So we had that discussion about what is the scope and responsibility of the board as a body. And yes, they're super excited about it, and it was awesome. The work that they were doing, 100% agree with it. You know, they were all on board. But keeping in mind what their legal kind of framework is, what their boundaries are, help them understand, okay, we want to be supportive of this, but how we go about doing it is really important. And that particular letter of advice, not that it was a bad thing, it just didn't fit within their scope and course. Okay. What are we talking about? adequate notice. Okay, so 12 hours, 2 weeks, we don't know. But finally they said, we need somebody to kind of referee this for us. What is adequate notice? And the Attorney General came back with an opinion and said, at least 48 hours is adequate notice. And that amount should increase with the relative importance of the decision. So if the city decides to disincorporate, they're probably going to need to put more than 48 hours notice on it, right?
And can't adequate notice be challenged in judicial proceedings?
It could. So the question was, could adequate notice be challenged? It absolutely can. With that Attorney General opinion, as long as they have 48 hours, they're pretty safe as a body. With the exception that you need to know where that notice is posted. And it could be different for each body. Most of the time, that decision is made by the governing body, by the county or the city, and it's in your resolution that establishes your body. So you will post at least 48 hours ahead of time, and it needs to be at the post office and at the courthouse and at the library, right? Whatever your 3 options are. Or it might be in a weekly newspaper. It can be online, but online should not be the only place. And you have to assume that not everybody has access online. So it could be a supplementary posting. Like the city and the county here posts online, right? But you don't just post online. So it's an extra step, but shouldn't be the bare minimum. Does that make sense? Okay, yeah.
Who decides how much of a comment period a potential action should take? 30 days, 45 days, 60 days?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, who decides how long the public action comment period should be? Some of it is defined by law, depending on what it is. But typically, unless you're doing something that has to do with changing fees or limiting behavior, taking final action, which for an advisory board shouldn't be the case, it can be in your bylaws or rules of procedure. So just make sure that you have all of that defined. And also, if you're going to limit public comment to some places will limit it to 3 minutes or 5 minutes a piece, you can do that. Just make sure that it's in your bylaws or your rules of procedure and that has gone through a public vetting process. So you have passed that document at a public meeting and had a chance for public comment. So that if somebody comes forward in the future and says, oh, you cut me off at 3 minutes. We went through a process and we established that that's how we do things. And you had a chance to comment on it then, you didn't. So it stands as is unless the body changes. Make sure that if you're enforcing that, you enforce it equally across the board. Because if you give somebody 8 minutes and somebody else 3 minutes and say, well, our rule is 3 minutes, you're not going to probably win that. Because it's unfair to the person that got less time. Does that make sense? So for the most part, with these boards and committees, you should be safe with what's in your bylaws or rules of procedure. And if you don't have them, that's okay. We have is it this one? Yeah. On the right side of the board packet, we have a boilerplate template for rules of procedure. So it is a guide for you and your body to decide how you want to operate. I would highly recommend, if you don't have one and you're going to establish one, talk to the folks at the city or the county after you have kind of an idea of what you want, and make sure it fits with the local government policies so you're not getting sideways with something the county's already decided. Oh, this girl took my lung capacity. Hold on. Okay. All right, so we got two sentences into 103. So 48 hours is the very minimum. I always have people ask me, is that business hours or is it regular hours? Kind of general hours. Well, it doesn't say, the opinion doesn't say business days. Although there is one statute under the county that says 2 days. Again, it doesn't say business days. So you could, in theory, post something at 5 o'clock on Friday night and hold your meeting at 6 o'clock on Monday afternoon and be safe. Right? You're well over the time. What does that do to your public trust? It's way down, right? The whole point of local government is to be transparent in your operations, because I had a local government executive tell me in the state that they needed to figure out what they absolutely had to put in the board or in the government packet and what they didn't, because they didn't need the public interfering with their business. It's not your business. It's the public's business, right? You're there to facilitate it, but it's the public's business. It's the public's money, public service. You're there to serve them. You shouldn't be trying to limit or hide anything. That's sometimes really tough to reconcile with those that are really interested in being efficient, right? It's the business of government is people, not the bottom line, not efficiency. It doesn't mean we want to be wasteful with people's time or money, but if the choice comes down to efficiency or a fair process will win out every time, and it's legally protected. Make sense? And that is so frustrating sometimes. Like, just get something done. Sometimes that's not an option. Okay. How are we doing online? Do you have any questions? Good? Good? Okay. So this whole, if there's a major decision needs more than 48 hours, typically if there's a major decision, it will happen over several meetings. You're going to discuss it, you're going to come back, you're going to get more information, you're going to discuss it again. So it should go on and on and on. And then you finally make a decision, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 meetings in. And you'll notice each of those meetings, but that ongoing discussion is a way for the public to engage in a meaningful way. Okay. The agenda for a meeting, defined in 23202, must include an item allowing public comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting and that is within the jurisdiction of the agency conducting the meeting. So somewhere on your agenda, you need to have public comment. So you need two things. You need to have public comment for anything on the agenda and public comment for anything not on the agenda. They can be in the same spot. That's completely fine. They don't have to. Where do you guys have your public comment periods right now? Is it at the beginning, somewhere in the middle, at the end, before each action item? End? Okay. You should be defining it in your rules of procedure, right? As long as it's consistent. You can't really overdo public comment options. I am a huge advocate for do it at the beginning for anything on the agenda, do it at each agenda item, and then do the public comment for anything not on the agenda at the end. The reason I say that is because that next sentence says, however, the agency may not take action on any matter discussed unless specific notice of that matter is included on an agenda and public comment has been allowed on the matter. So if somebody brings something to the body's attention during public comment that's not on the agenda, you can't have any kind of meaningful discussion about it. You can say, hey, that's important, let's put it on the next agenda. That's fine. But as soon as you get into deliberation, what have you done?
Failed to provide notice.
Okay, and why is that important?
Because it's in Montana Constitution.
So you are violating a constitutional right by engaging in that conversation. Which seems insane, right? Yeah.
So if somebody brought up something at the meeting, do they have the right to have that on the agenda the following time?
The agenda is typically set by the body. So you don't have to put it on the agenda. You could, and it's probably good practice unless there's a reason not to do it. But I would give them some kind of expectation. Hey, we don't have the capacity to deal with that right now. It's important that I hear you. But we're gonna have to put that off for a while until we finish these projects. Or, yep, that's super important. Let's talk about that next month. All you're doing basically is just protecting not the rights necessarily of the people in the meeting, but everybody else that didn't attend. Because if they would have known that that discussion was going to happen, maybe they would have come. Does that make sense? But it's really, nobody can demand that you put any single thing on the agenda. And public comment at the meeting has to be incorporated into the minutes. We'll talk about that in a minute. Minute. So, this public comment thing of anything on the agenda. You can either do it at the beginning, or you can do it before each action item, or both. That's fine. just make sure that whenever you do it, they have a chance to have that public comment taken into consideration before the action is taken. Does anybody here use consent agendas? Yeah, sometimes.
In the past.
Okay. What is a consent agenda? Typically for an advisory type board, you may not need it. You don't have tons and tons of stuff to get through. Consent agenda is a place on the agenda, typically at the beginning, where you have all kinds of, in theory, non-controversial routine things like reports, updates, the previous meeting minutes, all of those things. They go into one block and you vote on them as a block. You move to approve the consent agenda as it stands and all of the material thereof. So all of those things get approved in one motion. It's efficient and it's also highly dangerous for a public organization. Do it with nonprofits all the time because they don't have the same constraint of public comment. There was a city in Montana, it's fairly large, we won't say who, it was Great Falls. They had a consent agenda and they had, how did this work? They had a vendor who was providing basically dog pound, dog catcher services for them. And they were switching to a new vendor. And something happened, they got delayed in the start date. So there was like a 6-week gap where they weren't gonna have coverage of the dog catcher attack. So they said, let's just extend the old one to 6 weeks until the new one starts, okay? They didn't think that that was gonna be an issue, so they just put it in the consent agenda. Somebody from the public came, and so they did, the way that their agenda was set up, so they had opening ceremonies of some kind, they had roll call, that kind of thing. And then they had the consent agenda. And then they had their action items, but before they had their action items, they had public comment of anything on the agenda. And they had action items 1, 2, 3. And then they had public comment of anything not on the agenda. So they did their consent agenda. They approved the minutes, the treasurer's report, the departmental reports, all those things. And then they did public comment. And then they got into their action items, or typically would have. But during this comment period, a gal got up and she was super angry about this whole dog catcher thing for whatever reason. She wasn't a citizen of the city of Great Falls. She actually lived in Vaughan, which is a little unincorporated community right outside. But she was upset. So she got up to the lectern, gave her name and address, which, by the way, is that, do you have to do that? So there's actually nothing in statute that says you have to do any kind of sign-in, any kind of notice, any kind of this is who I am. You can put it in your policies, and that's fine. But asking people to sign in, and if they decide not to sign in, there's not much you can do about it. Anyway, so she gets up, says, hey, I'm so-and-so, absolutely disagree with this. This is a major issue. She kept getting more and more animated. They said, ma'am, your 3 minutes is up, you can comment. She wouldn't leave, kept getting more feisty. Started getting very aggressive. Ma'am, thank you for your comment. Please sit down. She wouldn't do it. So they finally had to have the on-duty police officer come up and escort her away from the lectern. So he got up there. He kind of gathered up her papers and stuff. He kind of took her by the elbow. Said, ma'am, please, you gotta go. Get you out of the room. Which, by the way, if you have somebody that's disruptive, that's the last thing that you should be doing. It's like last resort, is having them escorted out of the room. Do a recess, take a break, do something else before you start escorting people out, because somebody's going to have an issue with constitutional rights. But so they get her out of the room, almost, gets to the door. She turns around and she knees the officer in the groin, takes off running, finally catch up to her, and they charge her with evading arrest, assaulting a police officer, and disorderly conduct. So now it's the city versus this gal. And she goes to her attorney and says, hey, he's like, what happened? Well, this is a major issue. And they got up, they did this vote, it was awful, so I got up and I gave my comment. She said, wait. They did the vote before you got to have your comment period? She said, yeah. Perfect. So they countersued. Everything that happened after they did this out of order is now the responsibility of the city, including her offenses. So those got dropped. How much do you think it costs to violate a constitutional right in the state of Montana?
Okay.
What's that?
100K.
100,000. Anybody else? 500,000 was the damages, and they had another $400,000 in attorney's fees. So the city of Great Falls was on the hook for almost $1 million because these two things were flip-flopped. That's why this is so important. And that's a constitutional right? So it doesn't matter if they live in the city limits or out of city limits. As long as you're a member of the public in Montana, you qualify for that. City of Great Falls got to turn around and tell its taxpayers, hey, we got to charge you another $1 million, and you don't get anything else for it. The judicial system also does not care if you're the size of Great Falls or Missoula, or if you're the size of Ronan, or Circle, or Dillon. Doesn't matter. It's not about the size of the community, it's about the constitutional right of the individual. So that's why when we do these trainings, people say, oh, it's hard, we do this down here. Well, if you've done it down there and you haven't gotten tagged for it yet, it's worked for you. But now you know you're running the risk of a potential $1 million lawsuit if you're not giving people the chance to exercise their rights. Now, you can't force them to exercise their rights, right? All you can do is provide an opportunity. And that's where we get back to 103, where it says permit and encourage. This is what it looks like to encourage, to have those comment periods all the way throughout. And a lot of times what we'll see is public comment of anything on the agenda here. And they'll say, hey, if you're here for action item 3, and that's your public comment, hold off, and we'll do that at that time. Because it's a super controversial, everybody's angry and fired up. You can do that and say, because we don't want to lose the comments up here. We have a lot of business to get through before we get to action item number 3. So if you're here for that, hold off. And we'll do that public comment period right before we have that discussion. Yeah.
This is a little bit off, but one of the things that I've noticed in public meetings is that people can't ask questions, and it bleeds into frustration because you're like, so say there's something on the consent agenda and it's a financial budget, right? Like, which is just super standard. So you're like, hey, why are you spending this much on this or whatever? And they want to ask that question. And that seems to cause a lot of controversy in meetings, is that the public doesn't have an appropriate way to ask questions and they can only comment.
Yeah.
So like, is there a way where you can communicate appropriately with the public in a way that like encourages cooperation, partnership?
Yeah, that'd be nice, huh? So you're right, and the reason that that's happening, the reason that they can't ask questions and have that back and forth is because the public comment period is not an inquiry period, and it's addressing the body, which the governing body may or may not have the answers. It might be the finance department that has the answers, potentially. But that's why you have to have adequate notice. You have to have two days of notice so that the public has an opportunity to look at that. They could call their individual representative. Say you have a city council member. They can call their council member and say, hey, what's going on with this? And then that council member would be responsible for either addressing their question and or asking the question of the rest of the body. You could go that route. Or they could ask the city staff, if they have time, those clarifying questions. But if they're waiting until the actual meeting to ask the question, they're probably going to be disappointed. Because that's where you're addressing your comments, not asking for more information as a public.
So if you encourage people prior to the meeting to ask those clarifying questions, maybe in your meeting notification, that might help. Like if you have questions, ask them that.
Yeah, and it could be with your advisory boards. It could be your representative for your area is this person, and if they're sending information out, saying, "Hey guys, we're doing the meeting tonight," or Thursday night, whatever it is, here's the agenda, if you have any questions, let me know. I can bring thoughts back to the rest of the board, that kind of thing. So, and that's why we have the elected representative model, right? Is that they can be that conduit for the rest of the people. The body themselves, this is where it gets tricky. When you get into public comment, let's say one of the commissioners made a comment and I disagree with it. I want to push back on that. When I get up for public comment, I can't address that specific commissioner. I have to address the chair of the body. So it's a little bit removed and a little bit sterilized, which can be really frustrating for people because it feels antithetical to the democratic process. It's not, but that's where we get into this, the process base that feels like it's really slow. Because what should happen is if this is a legitimate question, we need to talk about why are you spending money on that thing? Well, let's hold off on passing the budget until we have an answer. And that slows down the whole process, which is not a bad thing inherently of itself. But people get frustrated with that. Well, I have to wait 2 weeks or a month before I get an answer. Yeah. It's probably not what you wanted to hear about.
No, it's just an interesting part of the process for sure, because the other side is that the board can sometimes be silent and pass it regardless. And then there's just this question that was asked during public comment that's hanging, and it seems to be completely disregarded. So from like a private standpoint, communication wise, that's the stupidest thing you can do, right? So like that's where it's like, is there any way to work within the required structure in a way that encourages like full disclosure and questions being answered and acknowledged from the public?
Yeah, no, and I think you're absolutely right, and that goes back to right number 9, the right to know.
Yeah.
We have the right to know and examine all of these documents, right? And I think this is kind of the catch more flies with honey than vinegar thing. If you can build a relationship with your representative, or if you are the representative, encourage the people to come to you. Let me know what your issues are. Please let me understand what you're thinking, and I will work on your behalf to work with the rest of the board or the committee to figure out an answer. So that building a relationship should happen before the question really ever gets to the meeting itself.
So just try to like do that pre-work.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's really hard because people won't engage until they have something that they're angry about. That's just where we're at, right? Yeah.
I've seen a board member move to remove an item from the consent agenda when a question comes up, and that removes it from the agenda, and then it doesn't end up getting discussed usually until the next meeting. But I've seen it happen.
Yeah, and that was specifically on the consent agenda?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a great point. So on these consent agendas, if you do use them, I would not encourage you to, but if you do, any one of the items on the consent agenda can be pulled by a motion of the body. So they say, we're going to leave the minutes and all the department head reports, but we're going to pull the treasurer report because there's something about the budget we have a question or something about the expenditures. So I move to remove the treasurer's report from the consent agenda and make it a standalone item. And if that passes, then you move it down and it can become one of your action items. And it can be addressed individually. You can still approve the rest of the block, and that one thing can be addressed by itself. That's a good point. Okay, any other questions so far? Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm clear on the topic, the public comment on the agenda. Is that intended to just be about the content of the agenda, or is it supposed to give them basically two bites at the apple of an agenda topic?
It could be both. So it could be, if they have an issue with the agenda itself, we can know about it then. Really, the intention is anything that's on the agenda that's going to be addressed by the body, you can do it here. And you could just have the one public comment of anything on the agenda and then not have public comment individually on each of the action items. That tends to not go over very well. Or you could do, hey, does anybody have any comment on anything on the agenda? And then you get to action item number 1. Does anybody have any public comment on passing the resolution to support the chamber in the fall festival? You know, and so you give them two chances on each item, basically.
And I was wondering what the advantage is of giving them two chances, other than they get 2 sets of 3 minutes.
Yeah. So the advantage is that you're protecting their constitutional right with that encouraging thing. So it's beyond just allowing them to participate, but it's encouraging them to participate. I would also say that if you have somebody that's just fired up and they do not like number 3, they should not routinely be using 2 comment periods to address the same topic. It's one topic, which is why when we say, if you're all here because you're angry about number 3, hold off, because we don't want to lose your comment that happened up here. We
Can
want
you
it to
actually
stay.
control that if you haven't specified that that's the way it's gonna work?
I would make sure it's in your policies. So put it in your rules of procedure or let them go. Let them go at two goes at it. It can make for a really long night. It's really frustrating. But I would rather see you err on the side of allowing too much public comment than them having any kind of standing to say, well, you said that I was going to be able to do it down here, but that's not anywhere in the policy, and I don't see where you stand or where that standing came from. So I would just make sure it's in your bylaws.
The other thing that I haven't seen, but since many of the people here are advisory, is the difference between advisory and policy, that if you're an advisory committee, you cannot make policy that would affect the entire county or city. You can recommend policy, but you can't make policy. And that becomes really, really important, because if you decide you're going to make policy, you may be spending several $100,000 to persons who are suing you.
Yes.
So that's something to keep in mind, and sometimes it's very, very fine. So
Yeah. So when we talk policy for advisory boards, it's only internal, right? So it's your rules of procedure. You don't have the authority to do anything besides advise the local government that created you. Administrative boards are a little bit different, and it kind of is dependent on the board itself. They're semi-autonomous, so things like fire districts fall under that because they have their own taxing authority and they can create rules for their district. But that's not the norm. Typically, you're going to be advisory unless you've been basically informed otherwise. Yeah.
Would you handle a situation where you say you're talking about agenda item number 1?
Okay.
And you ask for public comment on that agenda item, and then you allow board discussion. And during the board discussion, that triggers a question from the public. You say you've already had your chance, or how do you handle that? Do you ask for one of the board members to bring that question up, or?
That's a good question. Again, it depends on your rules of procedure, but what I would typically do is I like to err on the side of giving them a chance to have follow-up. Let's say number 3 is a super controversial. We are contemplating, let's talk about this too. We're a fire district. We have fire districts in the room?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Dang it, can't pick on them. It's fine. We'll still pick on them. Okay, so we're gonna be a fire district. Is this adequate notice? Action item number 3, fire truck. Why would it not be?
Purchase, repair.
What are we doing? Are we buying tires? Are we buying a truck? What are we doing, right? So let's say we said, purchase of a 2008 pumper truck for $84,000. Is that clear, what we're contemplating? Yeah, so that would be adequate notice on the agenda. What if it was, would it come to the council if we were trying to buy the truck for $78,000? No, because the threshold for purchasing is $80,000. As long as it's been budgeted by the local government, then the fire department or the fire district could go ahead and purchase it. But it's over $80,000, so it needs to come back to the board. They're going to look at it. Everybody's fired up. They think, no, we don't need to spend that money. We don't need another fire truck. Yada yada yada. So they're all there at the meeting, ready to just give them hell, right? Not that that would happen here, but hypothetically. What I would suggest you do is have the fire chief or the department head, whoever's kind of the one that's saying, hey, we need this. This happens with the planning department, have the city planner, the county planner be the expert, right? Have them come in and do an expert presentation first. And chances are, if people are upset, you usually know about it. You know some of the issues they have and the questions they have. So have that in the presentation. Why do we need another fire truck? What's the fire rating? All of those things. How does this change that? All of those questions that people have been circulating either online or in person or whatever it is, load those into that presentation because that'll start to bring down the anxiety and tension in the room. And then allow the board to ask questions of that expert. Board members should also be asking questions that they know are on the minds of the people in the room. Because two things are happening. One, people in the room can say, I can see the board members are actually considering this, they're not just rubber stamping it. And ooh, that board member has the same question I do. Maybe they're seeing the same concerns I do. It'll start to bring them down a little bit. And then you have public comment. Now the public comment is not to the expert, it's to the chair of the body, right? So they can come up and give their 3 minutes, 5 minutes, no timeline if you don't have it in your bylaws, to share their thoughts back with the committee before they make a decision. And then you close public comment, and then you have board discussion. And this is where, what if this is where they have the discussion? If it were me, I would say, and I was the chair, I'd say, board, are you good? Any more discussion? We heard these questions come up, or this information come up. Public, do you have any follow-up questions or comments? It does not mean you repeat what you just said. Is there anything additional that has not been included that you would like to add to the record? Give them a chance to do that. And then I would do more board deliberation. And if we're good there, then the chair could ask, are you ready to call the question? I would entertain a motion to purchase the 2008 pumper truck for $84,000. Somebody says so moved, somebody says seconded. All in favor say aye, all opposed same sign, and away you go. That is the structure for keeping things as calm as you possibly can when you have a very contentious topic. Does anybody use that strategy? Yeah, how did it work?
Oh, it worked really well. I mean, people were still upset at the end of the day, but we didn't vote for a motion then. Just we decided to hold off on it until there was like more room for discussion. Okay. And of course it was on rerouting the trail.
So of course it was.
It was always going to be.
Yep.
Yep. But yeah, and so we're still waiting to hold off for that public comment further because there needed to be more public deliberation.
Yeah.
They said the public comment period wasn't long enough.
Okay.
Even though it was 6 months long. So
yeah.
We're just giving more.
Yeah. Which is the whole point, right? Is to respond to the needs of the public. At some point, you're going to have to make a decision. But if they're saying loud and clear, "Hey, we haven't had enough time to contemplate this," great. Let's contemplate. Are you going to engage? Here we go, right? And I think choosing to postpone for more information is always a viable and can almost always be a helpful option because it lets them know that you're hearing their concern, saying, "Okay, we'll dig into this a little more before we make a decision to commit your money to something that you may not agree with." People will never all agree on the outcome, right? But as long as they feel like the process was fair, that's what matters. Because this whole structure, as cumbersome as it can be, is there to protect the rights of the people in engaging with their local government. Okay, how are we doing? It's 4 o'clock. Do you guys want a break? Yes, okay. Let's take about a 5-minute break. We'll come back about 1/4 after, and we'll go to page 2. We good on mine? Good. All right, we ready? Oh, yeah. If you have not signed, has anybody not signed the sign-in sheet? Okay, should we feel good about 23103 and what it means? I know that was a lot for one statute, but it's really the one that has like all the meaty stuff that we need. Everything else is, like I said, kind of how you do it. Okay, so let's look at page L3. A couple other things we need to talk about. Let's look at 23202, a meeting defined. A meeting means a convening of a quorum of constituent membership of a public agency or association, whether corporal or by means of electronic equipment, to hear, discuss, or act upon a meeting over which the agency has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. So what do we know? So what do we know we have to have for a meeting? Quorum, okay. And notice. And what else? Agenda. What else?
Comment period.
Comment period. What's the record of the meeting? Minutes. That little or is a really important conjunction. Anybody else here Schoolhouse Rock? Okay, hear, discuss, or act. Because you have a quorum and they are doing any one of those things, you have a meeting. So these two make it a meeting, these four make it legal. Does that make sense? That seems like not a big deal until you start thinking about, let's say you're the county commission. You go to a Grizz game. Somebody comes up to you and says, hey, commissioner, have you thought any more about that thing that we talked about at the last meeting? What just happened?
You're hearing discussion.
You're hearing something that you have jurisdiction over, and there's two of the three of you there. You now have a meeting. Okay? What if somebody brings something forward during one of your public comment periods, and you were going to talk about it last time during the meeting, and you ended up going to postpone it? There's three of you on the adjustment board, and one of your other adjustment board members texts you and says, hey, what do you think about that proposal? Is that a meeting? Yep. Because 23202 says by corporal or electronic means. If you're texting, calling, emailing, any of those things about anything that you have jurisdiction over, and it's beyond administrative or ministerial, you are deliberating, you're discussing something. And if there's more than half of you on that electronic communication, you're doing it as a quorum. So when you send out the board packets, if they're sent out and somebody responds back and says, I can't believe we're going to talk about action item number 2, this just seems ridiculous. You've now given your opinion on an action item to the quorum. Okay? So if you, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be sending out packets via email to review, right? Just make sure that when that happens, you're doing it BCC, so people can't accidentally respond back to everybody. They would have to manually go in and put everybody in. But this is where we get into a little bit of an issue, and I've had people fight me on it, which is fine. You're gonna lose in court, but that's fine. The statute says, hear, discuss, or act. You don't have to be making a decision. If you're talking about it, or if somebody else is talking about it and you're listening to it, that's considered a meeting, if you have a quorum.
So if there's no quorum?
If there's no quorum, you're okay, with one gigantic caveat. If, let's say there's 5 of us on a board, you and I talk about something that happened, or that's going to happen. That's not a quorum, so right now we're fine. But you and I have that conversation, and then you and I have that conversation. Now, 3 of the 5 of us have deliberated on that outside of the view of the public. Not at the same time, that's what we call a chain meeting. So that also will count as a quorum in the court size. Because that deliberation should happen in view of the public. That's the whole point of the transparency constitutional regs, right? So if you're having those discussions and deliberations outside of the view of the public, that's that. It gets even worse with a tax appeal board or an adjustment board because they have what we call quasi-judicial responsibilities. They're making judgments in somewhat of a judicial capacity on matters that should happen all in the public forum. So no communication outside of that public meeting should happen on those kinds of boards. That's like just a whole nother level of strictness that needs to be abided by so you don't violate a right. Yeah.
So we're talking about matters that the board or the agency has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power over. What if you're talking about the committee itself, right? So let's say a new member is appointed and they want to go meet each member of the committee, get to know them, to understand what the history is, X, Y, Z, to get familiar with the process. How do they do that appropriately?
I would do it in a public meeting. And so what he's saying is if you have a new member and you're trying to get them up to speed, kind of an orientation, right? How do you do that without violating this? The same way that you do a training like this. How many of you are here with the majority of your members represented? If you were, just think about this. You have a quorum and you could potentially be talking about something that you have jurisdiction over. Let's say you haven't given me an example. Hey, we dealt with this thing. We moved Park Trail. Okay. Have you discussed something that you have jurisdiction over, potentially, beyond ministerial? What I would do to be safe, to make sure you're protecting yourself and reducing risk, is say, post something that says, hey, majority of our board, our quorum will be established to orient a new member, give them history, welcome them, public's welcome to come join. There's no planned agenda and no decisions will be made, but there's a potential that something that we have jurisdiction over could be discussed. And put that out as your notice. Because what you're doing is saying that we know that you know, public, and we know that you know that we're supposed to have this out there, right? So it's a way to make sure that you're maintaining transparency and building public trust while still getting the work done that you need to. Okay.
Yeah, we have one question. If there's a quorum with the presence of an alternate board member, can the alternative board member vote if there's a vote?
What do the bylaws say? Typically, I would say no, because there hasn't been a vacancy established and you haven't appointed that person to fill the vacancy. But there may be situations, like I'm thinking about the election committee. There may be situations where the board has been established in a way that does allow them. There's a super lawyery answer to say it depends on what your policy says. Yeah.
So some of the bylaws that I've read for some of these various committees will say that you can openly participate in the discussion at the same level, but when it comes to the vote, like you said, unless you're appointed to fill the vote.
Yep. Because what you're doing then is it's the same thing in theory, unless it's been prescribed, it gives you that ability. It's like voting by proxy. You can't let somebody else who hasn't been duly appointed or elected to that position serve on behalf of the people without going through that process, that vetting process. So the idea of voting by proxy, you cannot vote by proxy. Why? If I'm not going to be at the meeting, why can't I just say, yep, I support that? So you didn't hear any of the public comment and deliberation, right? So you are not encouraging the public's participation, and you're not taking that into account when you make your decision. So you can't vote by proxy. You also can't vote by unanimous consent. So that's another thing that's different between public and nonprofit. Title 35 is what governs nonprofit board governance. Think about this. Title 5, Chapter 2, Part 4 is what governs the board of directors for a nonprofit. So 427 defines a meeting. So 35-2-427 defines a meeting for a nonprofit board of governors or board of directors. And 428 says, absent a meeting, that board can take action by unanimous written consent. Meaning they could send an email and say, yep, I support, make that happen before their next meeting. You can't do that with a public board because there has to be that public comment and that notice period. You can't take action via email consent. I also had a municipal clerk ask me one time, well, can we just have the council come in and all sign on this resolution and we won't establish a quorum? No, don't do that. Same thing. You're not allowing the public to comment and be a part of the process. You're trying to circumnavigate the rules that are there to protect the rights. Yeah.
So back to the question of alternates, maybe I just didn't hear the answer. If you are an alternate, are you counted as part of the calculation for being a quorum?
Typically not, unless your policy says otherwise, your bylaws, because you have your set number of representatives, and that alternate is usually not included in that number. But if your bylaws say otherwise, then I would go with that.
So as an alternate, you'd be freer to have conversations with other board members?
Yes, you absolutely would, yeah. And that doesn't mean, when we're talking about quorum in those public meetings and the chain meetings especially, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be interacting with your constituents, right? You absolutely should be having those conversations with the people that you represent. Just don't have the deliberations with a quorum of the other members of the body. Good? Okay. Also, if you have email addresses that you use maybe to get board packets and that kind of stuff, highly, highly recommend that each board seat has its own email address that is dedicated just to that board service. So if I'm serving on the water sewer district, I want to be getting emails to water sewer district member number 1 or ward 1, not to my ashlandkent@gmail account. Because if we ever get subpoenaed or get a FOIA request, the courts have access to my entire email record. Do I want them digging through? I mean, they want to dig through the 130,000 emails in my Gmail, they can have at it. But if you want to protect yourself and not have personal and board service intermix, have those be separate. And have those set up so that two things. So it protects you personally, and when that board seat turns over and the next person comes in as a representative, they have the history of everything that has happened in that email. Yeah.
As a participant in the board, on the board, can you demand that? I would, if you don't have that right now, I bring that up to the rest of your board and say, hey, this is the perfect excuse. Went to this training, learned this thing. To protect us, we really should think about establishing email addresses for the board seats and not for us. And it would take the board to say, yeah, let's go ahead and change our policies, bylaws, whatever it is. But I would definitely recommend it. Bring it up and say, yeah, just trying to protect ourselves. Yeah, sure. Follow-up question.
Yeah.
So let's say that you want to propose that, to change the bylaws. Do you have to go through that whole public comment, everything right there to do that?
I would. Yeah, because then when the public says, why aren't you responding to my email that I sent to you 2 months ago and now you're not responding back, you can say, we went through and had this change in our policy and now we only respond through this avenue to protect you and us. And they're still going to send stuff to your email. So what I would do is whenever it comes to your personal email, immediately forward it to your board email, and that's the only interaction you have. So that when the court comes back and says, we need access to all of your documents, you can say, you can see I didn't do any activity in my personal email. I was just routing it to the one it needed to go to. So that gives you a little bit extra layer of protection. I've had people say, well, I've been on the board for 15 years. I've been using my personal email, so basically it's a lost cause, right? I should just not worry about it. I still think it's worth it because yes, if something comes up and you get a request for anything that's happened, you're gonna have to dig through your personal email address. But if anything happens from this point forward, you could say that wasn't an issue until December of 2022 and we established our email addresses in September. So we know that this board email address is the one you need to look at, not my personal one. So it protects you going forward. Okay. Good, yeah.
Could you create your own alternate Gmail address on your own if your board decided not to have it be a policy or a bylaw? And then you have that record for yourself to protect your own.
Yeah, yeah. So you're saying if the board said, you come to the board and say, hey, guys, we should have our separate email addresses, and the board says, nah. And you could say, great, well, if we're not going to do that as a board, here's the email that I want to have any kind of communication with, and you create a whole new email for yourself. It protects you. It doesn't give the benefit of having that history for the next person necessarily, but your personal protection is there. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Nobody's doing meetings over text? Okay. That sounds like a lot of work. What else do we need to talk about? So we can talk about hybrid meetings. Where are we at with hybrid meetings? Do you guys, does anybody do those? Yeah? How does that work?
Like this.
Like this. Poor people online are like, oh my gosh. My biggest concern if you're doing hybrid meetings, you need to make sure that everybody has the ability to hear and respond in real time. So the audio for me is the important piece. It's like live discussion. Video is nice, audio is a must-have. Everybody needs to have access. And if you're going to stream it, and people are going to be able to have public comment, that needs to be part of the notice. So however you log in needs to be on that agenda or notice or whatever you're doing. And they need to be treated the same as anybody in the room. So if anybody in the room gets 3 minutes, anybody online gets 3 minutes. Right? Yeah.
How do you cover your bases to ensure that, so like nobody, I can't see anybody online that has their camera on, so how are you ensuring that they're receiving public comment?
They're receiving public comment?
Right, so if let's say that there's 12 members online that are voting members,
okay,
and somebody gives a comment, and then no discussion, or it seems that it's not reflective in any way, shape, or form, can that person then challenge and say, well, how do I know those 12 people were even listening?
I would, if I was that person in public. I would say and this would be another thing you put in your policies, for your board members, I would have them, require them to have audio and video, so you could see that live. And then the public, you can't require them to have video, right? But that way you can have a record of them participating, so it's not like, oh yeah, they just went out and walked their dog while I had my public comment. I don't know, right?
So, yeah, could I, so say for instance, I'm just kind of curious about the liability here. So say the audio fails, right? Or you have some tech issues and you have an action item and you're moving through your like board questions and then public comment, board questions, public comment. Should you just end the meeting, or should you, like, if there starts to be technical issues, should you take it off the table, or what happens if you just move forward and then pass it as an action? Is there a complaint there?
I'm prefacing this with, we are not attorneys. Because Mako and the MMIA like to remind us that we're not attorneys. But what I would do is, if you have something on the agenda and there is an expectation that they would be able to participate electronically, and because of some technical thing they can't, I would shut it down and say, we'll postpone it, we'll pick it up in 2 days or at the next meeting or whatever it is. But I would err on the side of allowing them to have participation, even if it means delaying your process.
That's an interesting conversation because that probably happens a bit now, like now more and more, because like certain school boards and things like that are moving to a hybrid model, and I think there's public support for that, but I never really thought of if there's tech issues. I just kind of thought those Zoom attendees were out of luck.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So that's interesting.
Well, and it depends on kind of a who's at fault thing, right? So if we're doing the Zoom meeting and that's not working and they can't access it, that's on us. But if they are out checking cows and they're out in a ravine and they lost service, it's not an us problem, right? You need to get up on top of the hill. So just be careful about if everybody's losing access and it's all going down, that was an expectation that was not met. If one person just has bad service,
that's not your fault.
Yeah.
So the onus is on the board.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I would say everybody will always challenge and say it's your responsibility as the public agency to protect their constitutional rights. So they'll push on it as much as they can. But if you can say everybody else on there was totally fine, there's something about their system. And make sure on that notice, if you're doing a Zoom meeting, you always have the call-in number. So if they lose internet, they can always call in and hear the discussion. Trying to think of anything else that we need to talk about for that. We had a technical assistance question this morning from somebody on, I think, a fair board. I was saying one of their board members was angry because they were doing work sessions and the board member said, you have to notice this and it doesn't, you can't just do it just by calling it a work session. So we're just trying to figure out logistical details for the rodeo. Can't we just get this done? What do we do? So we said back, if a quorum of your fair board is meeting, yes, it's a meeting, whether you call it a work session or an informal gathering time or kumbaya time, whatever you call it, if a quorum of the body is meeting and discussing something in their jurisdiction, you have to follow the open meeting requirements. Which can be hard because those work sessions tend to be where a lot of the work gets done. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have them. A lot of times what will happen is work sessions will be, all of those details get ironed out, and then the final action happens at the meeting. But you still have to notice and allow public participation in the work session. And that can be a lot more informal back and forth, and the public can be more engaged and have more lengthy discussions. But you can't just not follow the open meeting laws because you call it a work session and not a meeting. So who falls into that requirement of open meeting laws? If you look at 23203, all meetings of a public or government body supported in whole or in part by public funds or expending public funds must be open to the public. Also down below, number 6, any committee or subcommittee appointed by a public body or association described in subsection 2 for the purpose of conducting business that is within the jurisdiction of that agency is also subject to requirements. So if you spend public money, if you funded in whole or in part by public money, or if you are appointed by a public body, you are responsible for following the open meeting laws. Pretty much everybody. Okay.
We have a question online from Joanne. Joanne, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, I was just wondering, wouldn't that follow under the administerial exception? If you're not making policy or discussing policy in any way, you're just figuring out how to do the work. Who's going to show up at 8 a.m. to open the gate? That kind of thing. Why would that be public domain?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's still public because you are still deliberating on how to deliver a public service. So when they talk about ministerial, it's more about the internal operations of the body. So are we going to meet tonight, or are we going to meet next week at 6 or at 7? That's what they mean when they say administrative. It's about the operations of the body itself. When you get into the service that the body provides, in this case, the fair board, any discussion of any service is considered significant public interest, or could be by the public and should be open to the public. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
And I don't know if that's applicable to any organizations either, but what about like a subcommittee where like, let's say there's a 10-member board and each board member chairs a subcommittee of non-elected, non-whatever people to do a work session. How does that actually?
It's a great question. That one comes up a lot. Good Lord, my lips are dry. I think the kid's taking all my liquid. Okay, so subcommittees, that is a great question. So let's say you are the Fair Board. So you've been created by the County Commission. We're going to make a subcommittee to do fundraising and a subcommittee to do stock contracting and a subcommittee to deal with the 4-H kids. Each one of those subcommittees is now its new independent body. So what I've had several local government agencies try to do is they say we have a 6-member or a 10-member board, which by the way is way too big. Let's say we have a 10-member board and we put 3 members on each of these subcommittees, so we never have quorum of the board. So we don't need to follow that. No. Those new subcommittees that you created are now their own standalone bodies. It's a quorum of that subcommittee, not of the board. So every time that subcommittee meets, they have to follow open meeting laws because it's about them, not about this larger structure. Is that what you're asking? Yeah. And I understand. I mean, it's a pain in the butt sometimes to try to get things done, and that's why you do subcommittees. But when it comes down to it, you're still responsible to protect the constitutional rights. That's why we follow all of these things. Yeah.
One of the things I have is if you're a nonprofit and then somehow you get a grant, that's a public grant, now you're subject to these same rules and laws, open meetings and all of that?
My favorite answer ever, talk to your county attorney. Because some of them will say, they're the ones that have to defend it. In theory, so the question is, if you're a nonprofit, let's say you get some money from a local government, now are you responsible and subject to all of these rules as well? Potentially is the answer. A lot of times what we'll see is that the county attorney or the city attorney will say, when you're deliberating on anything that has to do with that money, expending that money, it needs to be open and it needs to follow public meetings. If you're doing anything else, that's on you, you're a nonprofit. It depends. But some county attorneys I've seen say, nope, it's a chunk of money and it just goes and it's already been expended through the local government piece of it. This is how we decided to spend it, and that's as far as it goes. Then there's county attorneys that have gone the other way and say, nope, everything that you do needs to be open because now you're partially funded by public dollars.
Question online.
Yeah.
Are irrigation district boards advisory or policy boards?
Irrigation district boards are the bane of my existence, them and school boards. They are administrative because they're a unique and special snowflake all to themselves. They are created by the district court, not by the county commission. And I'm very hesitant to give any advice on them because they fall under a whole different section of the law. So they are administrative and they have all kinds of different rules. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to the liability between like a nonprofit board of directors that makes a decision versus an advisory board that recommends a decision?
Can you give me an example?
So like if you're serving on the board of a nonprofit and everybody votes for XYZ financial thing that puts them in the dirt, all those board of directors have potential liability for that. Whereas let's say that the planning board makes a recommendation for this X rezone that then leads to this consequence, even though they're not the people that make it policy, they made the recommendation to make the policy. What's the liability there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So board of directors for the nonprofit should be covered under their general liability insurance, right? But they could potentially be personally liable. On page, I'll come back, remind me we have to come back to L3, but on page somewhere, there we go. L9 starts the Montana Code of Ethics. And then look at page L10. So the holding of public office or employment is a public trust created by the confidence that the electorate reposes in the integrity of the public officer. Public officer shall carry out the individual's duty for the benefit of the people of the state. This is where it's important. That public officer whose conduct departs from the person's public duty is liable to the people of the state and subject to the penalties provided in this part for abuse of public trust. So, fancy way to say, in the public setting, if you are following your course and scope, you will not be personally liable. You'll be covered by the local government's insurance, basically, your general practice or risk liability. If you get outside of your course and scope, you are personally liable. I have all kinds of stories that I can tell you about public officials who've been outside of course and scope, but we don't have time for that. The mayor that was being the dog catcher, it turns out that he didn't have the authority to be the dog catcher, so he had to pay for his own legal fees in the court case where he took the 2 brand new dogs to town, outside of town, shot them, put them in the coulee. Turns out they were a breeding pair from a new family that moved to town. And the attorneys came in and said, where is your resolution that gave the mayor the authority to be the dog catcher? We don't have it. The mayor's on his own. Or the tree board member, who, tree boards are advisory, right? Tree board member who was walking down the street doing his tree board member duty, checking out the trees. There was one big old tree that was hanging over, and you could see it was, the integrity was starting to fail. Says that needs to go. The property owner says, no, I like that tree. It's fine. It's not hurting anybody. It's above the 7-foot requirements. So tree board member goes out one Saturday afternoon with his chainsaw and just cuts the tree off at the property owner. Now you have an 80-year-old tree that is mutilated, and how happy is the property owner? Not. And they are an advisory board, so the only thing that they can do is advise. So he also got to pay for his own court fees and damages to the property owner because he was outside of course and scope. That's why it's so important to understand advisory versus administrative, because if you're staying in your lane, especially as an advisory board, your job is to communicate with the public, understand the issues, and advise the local government on those issues. You should be fine. You're protected and you're covered. If you step out of course and scope, you're going to pay for it personally if somebody tries to come after you. Yeah.
Can we expand on communication with the public? What
Sure.
does that look like? What can that look like? What are those boundaries?
Ooh, it's like you guys are leading me. I love it. Okay, let's go back to L3. Because this ties into open meeting laws too. There's nothing that you should be discussing under your jurisdiction on an advisory board that can't be shared with the public, in theory. There are 2 times when you can close a meeting. 1, anytime the discussion relates to a matter of individual privacy, then if and only if the presiding officer determines that the demands for the individual privacy clearly exceed the merits of public disclosure. There's an AG opinion on this. It says that's things like IQ test results and medical records and arrest records, that performance evaluations, that kind of stuff. That falls under this personal privacy information, individual privacy. And you have to be careful when you're closing a meeting like that, because what you're doing is balancing those 2, the right to know and participate and the right to privacy. Both are constitutional rights. So by upholding one in this case, you are by definition violating another. Okay? Nobody in this room, if you're not on the school board, should be doing anything with individual privacy rights. The other time that you can close a meeting, look at 4B. No, 4A, I guess. You can close a meeting to discuss strategy to be followed with respect to litigation when an open meeting would have a detrimental effect on the litigating position. If you're being sued or suing a private party, it doesn't count if it's another public agency. So if the city and the county are suing each other, they don't get to close for litigation strategy. Okay. Ask Bozeman and Gallatin County, they do it a lot. So, with that context, that the only 2 times you close a meeting are individual information and litigation, and neither of those should apply to your boards, you should be able to discuss just about anything with the public. So you can have forums, you as an individual board member have forums with your community, that area that you're responsible for, have discussions with the members of the community, and then bring that back. You could share stuff with them, you could do it electronically, you could do it in person, you can do all of those things. Stay away from the quorum with the rest of the members, and you're fine. Right? You could set up an expectation that you're available in a way that's not sustainable if you do that. So be very clear about what you will and will not do to communicate. Hey, I'll send you out regular emails with updates after each meeting. Within 3 days of each meeting, I'll send you an update. Or I will send you a reminder if you're on this mailing list. Come to the meeting and here's the things we're going to be talking about. That kind of stuff. I would stay away from call me or text me anytime about anything, because you will burn yourself out in about 3 weeks. It'll eat all of your time. But there's no reason you can't. Yeah.
Is there any record keeping or disclosure laws you have to have about conversations that you have?
The only disclosure that you really need is a lot of times what we'll put on the meeting agendas, somewhere around here, maybe after public comment, you can do a correspondence and communication update. So each board member could go through and say, hey, in the last month since we met, I've had conversations with people in our community about this, this, and this. And here's what they're thinking. So you can share it back to the rest of the board, has that information. And that's a way to keep things transparent above board, so it doesn't look like they're trying to kind of play you as a puppet. You're sharing what they've shared with you, but it's through the representative model and not just like, well, Joe Smith said this, and Anna said this. No, it's not about the people, it's about this is the concerns or the support that I heard from the community. So I would do it in that capacity, because then there's no question about you being impartial with what you're hearing. Yeah.
Confidential letters or comments to board members, to the board president or the board, and you sign it, but you don't want it read because you don't want people to know what you're thinking. And my advice is give it back to them.
They need to own up to their democratic
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right.
And board members can't write confidential letters to their boards.
Right. Yeah. So that all of that's public deliberations, right? So if they're not willing to say it in public comment, they can absolutely send it in a written form, but that goes in the record, right? So you don't get to be the naysayer anonymously. That's not how local democracy works. Yeah. So they need to own their piece of this as well. If they have something to say, great, say it. Public comment standing up in front of a group of people can make some people incredibly uncomfortable. And I highly recommend for those to send in the letter and have the board look at it. Don't give it to them the day of the meeting with a 20-page letter and expect anything to happen. Because typically what will happen then is they have to postpone the decision because they haven't had time to look at the comments.
So is there, let's say you held a little forum or whatever as an individual, and you went back and during the communication update you said, I heard that the community opposes this project, and then somebody says, who said that? You then have to say, Joe, Sally, this and that.
I would say that was the general consensus of the discussion that I had at the meeting on September 2nd. So then you're not necessarily calling out individual people, and they should, I mean, that shouldn't be a secret meeting, right?
Right.
So you had a chance to come too, you decided not to come. This was the general kind of feeling of the group that I heard. But then you're not necessarily having to say, well, this person said X. And I've had some council members, city council members push back on that a little bit, saying, well, how is that different than the confidential letter? Well, it's about the issue, not about the people. So you're saying in general, these 12 people that came to my listening session, this was their feeling. And we recognize it's 12 out of 20,000, but these 12 are the ones that I heard from, and this was their consensus. So you're giving context and perspective, saying we're not saying everybody in town thinks this, but this group that I met with since the last meeting, this is what they said. Okay. So I highly encourage you to take a look at the ethics statute. You can't use your position for personal gain. So no taking favors or gifts of substantial value, which would be $50 or more.
Does that adjust for inflation?
I wish. You talk to the legislature about adjusting for inflation. We'll see how that goes. I don't know. That does not include training, food or beverages consumed during your official duties, educational material, any of that stuff. I know that these are lavish gifts, but this doesn't count. Right? City of Bozeman, the movie theater would give each city commissioner 2 movie tickets once a month as a thank you. Saying, you guys' job sucks. Here, take your spouse to the movie, do whatever you want to do, right? Great. That was when movie tickets were like $6 a piece. And they said, well, is it one time or is it cumulative? Statute doesn't say. Right? So they said, we really appreciate the gesture, but we feel like we probably shouldn't do this because it might look bad, and perception is reality a lot of times, right? So they said, thanks, but no thanks. And movie theater said, that's fine. And like 2 or 3 years later, that movie theater came up for sale and needed to be rezoned. So how would that have looked if they'd been accepting these tickets for the last 3 years? And then now they need a zoning change so they can get more out of their property. And they expect the council to do that. So City of Bozeman went a little bit extreme, and they created their own ethics policy and said, we're gonna not allow any gifts of any kind. No gifts to the city employee. And then do you guys remember in 2009 when the R-Bar blew up in downtown Bozeman? Yeah. There was a whole block of Main Street in Bozeman that just blew up one morning, early May. And our emergency response people were awesome. And you couldn't go anywhere in Bozeman for the next 6 months as a firefighter or an EMT or a police officer to buy a meal. It wasn't gonna happen, right? The entire community wanted to buy their meals for them. Now they're in direct violation with their own city code of ethics because they can't accept that, even if it's under $50, because their code says $0. Even worse, I think, the little kid, 6-year-old, that came in with the cookies and cupcakes for the firefighters and said, Mr. Firefighter, thank you so much. The firefighter gonna say, sorry, kid, can't take the cupcakes. So what they did, they put it out in the little vestibule out front and said, free cupcakes for public consumption, and then the firefighters ate them all. But they were available to the public, right? So that one extreme or the other, just think about what is the perception of the action? Is it meant to, or would the perception be that it's meant to improperly influence your discharge of your duties? And if it is, then don't do it. We also have some ethics and nepotism and what's the other thing? Nope. Anyway, you shouldn't have any nepotism issues because you're not making personnel decisions. Nepotism is the bestowal of political patronage by reason of relationship rather than merit. You can't hire your kid, but you shouldn't be hiring anybody else. So, if you have questions about that, we can definitely talk about it. Make sure to check out, if you haven't already, on page L19, talks about boards and general board statutes. Everything kind of comes back to the resolution that creates you as a board or body. If you haven't seen the resolution that creates you, check it out, because it can give you a lot of insight about how you're supposed to be structured, what you're supposed to do, and it can really feed your policies, your rules of procedure, that kind of thing. And then the right side packet. This is a whole bunch of reference material, the principles of good governance that we follow at the center and what we teach when we go out and do trainings. And then that boilerplate document I told you about for rules of procedure, if you don't already have them, is on page R3 through R8. One thing that's not in here, I think, is limiting public comment to a time period. So if you want to add that, that would have to be added in because I don't think we have it in there. And then finally, parliamentary procedure, quick reference guides. Everything that we do is through Robert's Rules. I read this lovely book twice, and then I forgot about 2/3 of it. But before I did, I made an online course. It's free, open anytime on our website, which is on the back of your packet. It's self-paced. So if you want to know more about parliamentary procedure for public officials in Montana, that kind of combines Robert's Rules and the open meeting laws, that's out there and you can take it at any time. What else do we need to talk about communication guidelines? Don't be afraid to engage with the people that you represent. That's why you're there. Be careful about how you engage with your fellow board members to make sure you're not violating a constitutional right. And make sure that you understand the reporting relationship between you and the local government body, the commissioner, the council, that created you. And you're staying within that role and scope so that you're protected. You're just advising. Now, if you as an advisory board, or any board, make a decision, and you disagree with it, should you turn around and tell your community members that, well, the board voted this way, but I disagree? Don't do that. We are not in DC, okay? The body made the decision. No individual has any authority. The authority only comes from the body when they're acting in a quorum. Once that decision is made, it's done, move on. You may not agree with it, but you're still part of the body. So that was the board's decision. You agree with it? Well, that was the decision of the board. Don't spend the time and the will and the energy with the politics of, well, I disagree and I don't think we should do that. What'll end up happening is you'll end up isolated and not a relevant member of the body. Doesn't mean you should never disagree with discussion, but once the decision happens, move forward. Yeah. Other issues that we've seen. Hand up. Hi. Is that Karen?
Karen, can you unmute?
Hi, I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Is the link listed for Robert's Rules booklet?
The booklet is, you have to buy this, the Beastie book.
Okay. The one that didn't you say you made a little sort of
so
small
yes,
version of it?
that is an online course.
Okay.
And so one thing you could do with the course, I think it has 6 units in there, and there's notes that go with each unit. So what you could do is go in, register for the course, print the notes, and you wouldn't necessarily have to finish the rest of the course, but you could have those printouts. And then also on the right side of the packet, there's a whole bunch of quick reference materials. So I would check out both of those.
Okay. Is there a link for that, or should I just go on?
Go to on the packet. Let's see.
Yeah.
The msulocalgov.org, which is should be on the. Nope, it's not. I'll add it to this. msulocalgov.org. It'll take you to our homepage, and then there's a banner at the top of the homepage. We're in the middle of reconstructing our website because it's terrible. But there's a banner at the top of the homepage. If you click, I think it's 2 clicks to the right, you'll see the banner image for parliamentary procedure for public officials. And if you click on that image, it'll take you to the homepage, to the landing page for that.
Cool. Thanks.
If you can't find it, call me or email me. We'll get it to you.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so LGC trainings are notorious for running over time. That's what we do. But I'm only 4 minutes over, so that's pretty good. So, any other questions? I will hang out for as long as you need. But if you have questions, concerns, thoughts, let me know. Otherwise, I really appreciate your time and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See the sign-in sheet, like,
oh,
that discussion of emails reminded me I used the wrong one.
Oh. Perfect.